Hello, Michael.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for your time. I think
Of
it's an
course.
important topic that as Torontonians, we feel like there's a crisis going on. But how can we help? So, the homelessness in Toronto is on everybody's mind. And I want to start with some jarring statistical number here. Um, 9,000 plus people in Toronto are homeless on any given night. Is that right?
I'd say the numbers I've seen are closer to 10, 11,000 people, so it's gone up, yeah.
Oh, wow. So I want to first of all understand because we in Toronto come from different parts of the world, just like the whole of Canada. It's a land of immigrants. We have our own cultural biases from where we come. And when we see a homeless person, um, I think generally we kind of want to judge that situation. Why is this person in this situation? I'm going to be honest about it. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything here in our podcast. So, first of all, I want you to please define for our listeners and viewers what is homelessness in Canadian context? How do you define it? And what are the reasons that somebody ends up in that situation? Because obviously it's not your choice. Like, okay, today I want to be homeless.
Yeah, good questions there. I mean, I think the first thing that we have to get beyond it is I think that we're a very visual society, right? And if we don't see homelessness, we think it doesn't exist, right? Or we have this picture from media or television and social media that homelessness would look like. And I often talk about this with grade two classes. What does it look like? And they'll give that description, that stereotypical, like this older guy with a beard who's, they almost describe me, right? But it's what they see on the streets of downtown Toronto. And first to say that homelessness doesn't really have a look, right? It looks like you, it looks like me. There isn't a look to it. In fact, many people go uh, really out of their way to make sure that they blend in because they don't want to be attached to the stigma, right? So it has many different. There's no look to it. It's a feeling. It's a feeling of isolation, of fear, of loneliness, um, of hopelessness, that kind of thing. The actual definition of homelessness, if you want a technical definition, there's a couple, and I would encourage people to go to the homelesshub.ca for that. And it really is like anyone. I love Adam Vaughn's definition where he said people experiencing homelessness are just neighbors without a home. That's exactly what they are, just neighbors without a home. And then there's an indigenous definition as well, because homelessness means something, it's more connected to nature and the land in the indigenous definition. But really, you'll hear me say people experiencing homelessness because you want to see the person first. It's a person first approach. It's not their experience. They're going through something. But sometimes when we see someone experiencing homelessness, we see their experience and not the person. And they are people. They are aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, spouses, uh, children, right? They are people and they're going through an experience that's challenging and dangerous, and they need our help, right?
I just recently did a podcast on midlife crisis. And then while doing research for our podcast, the numbers saying that 32% of the homeless population in Toronto, the age range is 45 to 64 years old. That is not a good time to be homeless.
Well, no, I mean, I think
How do people
that,
end up during that age in that situation?
I'll give an example even from Blue Door, where I work, right? Where there was a gentleman who's in one of our programs and he's like, hey, look, I want to destigmatize this, right? Because he says, again, people will kind of look down or say it's your choice, but he was a graphic designer. And as he aged, there was some ageism there that you're no longer relevant in this, kind of tech boom and everything happening. He was out of work. He found himself, he went from award winning graphic designer to being out of work and not able to meet the matching or the rising rents across the GTA. So he's in one of our programs now, but he's like, look, I'm healthy, I'm hardworking, I'm smart. And these are just life circumstances. The average age or the average lifespan of someone who is experiencing straight homelessness, so that would be chronic homelessness over 6 months of living on the street, is 47. And that's
Mhm.
crazy, right? So when you talk about those numbers, but I think it's when people and I see this with adult men, people really feel badly if it's a family experiencing homelessness, as they should. People feel really bad if it's a senior, if it's a youth or a child, a woman escaping violence, as they should. But there's less empathy for males within that age range that you're talking about. Yeah, that's probably their fault. It's on them. It's that there's not a lot of empathy, and also a lot of pushback from the community when you try to put services in to service that population as well. So it's very difficult.
I'm also wondering if men would be more hesitant to kind of go to a support group and ask because they may be thinking that, okay, I'm going to be judged just because I'm a male, um, versus a woman who's in that situation or a family in that situation. Does that happen?
Well, I think I'd say this for if there's kids involved, people generally take action, right? Both men and women, and you have single fathers with kids, and more often you have single moms with kids fleeing violence, right? And they're going to do whatever it takes to make sure their children are well protected. They always put themselves second.
Hmm.
Um, but for men, I think, I mean, for everyone, there's a stigma too. Like there's the talk about, like, if you're trying to talk to youth about here's a homeless shelter, youth are like, whoa, I don't need that. I'm not homeless. Well, do you have a safe place to stay tonight? Well, no. So you
Hmm.
are in a sense, but you change the language to, do you have a safe place? Do you need a safe place to crash? Yeah, of course. Yeah, I can do that, but I don't want to be. So I don't see myself as that. I don't want to be associated with that stigma because there's a negative stereotype to it. So there's a lot of shame in asking for help, but people will hide that. A lot of kids will walk around all night and then still go to school and sleep during class time because they finally feel safe and at peace. And then they're judged as lazy kids sleeping through class. But man, it's terrifying being out on the streets, being young, especially during the winter where you could freeze. And that sense of loneliness too, right? So there's a lot of judgment, I think. And it's not because people are bad people, they just are not aware. They don't understand the issue.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. What do you think, according to you? What are the top three or two key drivers of homelessness in Toronto?
Well, I mean, I think family breakdown is huge, right? When you talk about youth entering homelessness, I think it's 80% when the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness did a survey in 2017. 80% kids under 16 who experienced homelessness said it was due to family breakdown, divorce, violence in the household, etc. Right? That starts. And divorce can do that. You've been going along, the family breaks down, and then there's a huge financial setback for the parents, or uh, and the kids, emotionally have some trauma they're dealing with, right? So there's that. There's family breakdown. It's just sheer cost. We're seeing more and more people that are working part time or full time that are accessing emergency housing, also known as shelter, because they don't have an option. They can't afford $2,000 a month, which is the average for a one bedroom apartment in the GTA. Or they don't have a household income of $100,000, which is what you need to afford a one bedroom apartment in the GTA. If you're taking the measure of 30% of household income should be spent on housing, right? So income is a huge part of that. And listen, it's really also lack of supply. Our population is growing faster than the supply of housing that we have. I
Hmm.
love this country that we welcome so many new Canadians in. We need that. I love it. I love the diversity. However, if we don't have the plan to match, we don't have the supply of housing, both deeply affordable and affordable and rental and all those different pieces, and we don't. We're seeing this crunch that we have now, pushing people into emergency programs and pushing people to the streets. And on any given night in Toronto, I think right now you have 200 to 300 people that cannot find a spot, that are turned away when they're calling 311.
I would think it's hurtful both ways. I know what you're saying that when we welcome new immigrants or people from across the world, it is such an amazing thing. But then if they are not promised or taken care of for basic needs, it's not good. Um, I know we talked about before our interview that shelter users who receive Ontario Works or Ontario Disability Support, the rates do not match up with the inflation that's going on in the city. So how can we address that?
Yeah, I mean, so let's take a look at your single person would receive on Ontario Works, which is welfare or social supports, with $700 a month. Out of that, I think it's about 300 or so is for shelter costs. And you think about the average shelter being $2,000 a month, so a massive gap. Those numbers, and what happened in 1995
Mhm.
is the Harris government actually cut that way back, and it's never recovered. It's still lower than it was in 1995, throughout these years. So talk about adjustment. If you have a disability and you receive an Ontario disability supports, you get about $1,300 a month. Again, with all those special needs that come with trying to cope with your disability and rise to that challenge, you also are short already on shelter and food and those pieces. So yeah, we can't have a conversation about ending homelessness and poverty reduction without talking about a living wage, and that employers need to pay a living wage, and
Yeah.
that we have to look at those supports. We have to look at, uh, you know, so if you look at, say, I use CERB as they say is the golden example of a basic income. We have to look at that, right? And basic income, as it's just one lump sum, maybe not. But the government has various support programs, but they need to be easier to access, cobbled together. If you look at during the pandemic, when the government said, "Hey, the bare amount that people should live on is $2,000 a month," and what we saw with CERB was that core housing need dropped, food bank usage dropped dramatically, and
Hmm.
now we look at the end of that where food bank usage is at all-time high. 1 in 10 people in the GTA are accessing food banks. Core housing need is really, really high, as we talked about, right? Um, so we know if it's 2,000, then why are we accepting the fact that provincially people are getting $700 to $1,300,
Yeah,
right?
that.
We've already determined that wasn't enough. 2,000 probably wasn't enough, but it was better, right? And I think we've seen some movement lately, mostly from the federal government, at trying to address that with the Canadian Disability um, support and other things that they're coming through now that are trying to help people with cost of living around childcare, medical pieces, and the disability support.
Another component that I want to talk about, that 75% experiencing homelessness, they struggle with mental illness. Why are the two things attached to each other?
Well, there's two pieces here, right? I think if you have an undiagnosed or untreated mental illness, or you have mental health challenges, that might lead to you not being able to hold down your housing or pay for rent or hold down a job or stay with your family because it's unsafe or it stresses them out and they can't. So there's pieces around that push people to or conflict with the law, right? Um, there's plenty of people with mental health challenges that are fully functional and work within, but that does happen. And then say maybe because you have these untreated mental health challenges, maybe you self-medicate with different street drugs, and now you've got addictions and mental health challenges, right? Now,
Mm.
here's the other thing: you may not be experiencing mental health challenges, and you end up on the street. And let me tell you, when you're sleep deprived, and you're walking around in precarious housing, not getting a good night's sleep, not eating well, um, your mental health erodes. So if you don't have mental health challenges before you experience homelessness, you most likely, if you're experiencing it over the long term, will develop pieces around, through your experience, right? And that you'll need supports with, right? So it's very much linked. But I think also stay away from that stereotype. Not everyone experiencing homelessness has mental health challenges or addictions. And I think quite often, I was listening to a famous celebrity, Matthew McConaughey, once, and he talked about all people experiencing homelessness need to be rehabilitated. And I thought it's a real broad brush to paint everyone experiencing homelessness with. There's many that don't need rehabilitation. They simply need deeply affordable housing for the long term.
Exactly. Yeah. Michael, you have your own podcast. I love the name of it, On the Way Home. Congratulations on that, first of all. Um, any particular story or guest that stands out in your mind and is your favorite episode? You want to share that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've been doing this for 5 years now. It's been great, and we do it weekly. And here's what I know: we've got brilliant people, both the lived experience that are now saying, "I've been through it, come out the other side, and I want to share what worked for me and what didn't work." We have researchers that come on that have done different projects that share that research. We've had innovators, we've had frontline service providers. So really cool around the world, right? So some of my favorite, we've had Johan from Finland. and Finland's the country closest to ending homelessness, come on and talk about how that happened and how over the past 25 years they've kept housing a top priority for government, even through changes of government like we have from liberal to conservative, etc. They've and almost to the point where they can say we've ended homelessness, right? So that's been one of my favorites. I love the panels when we have various people coming on to talk about different pieces, and up and coming too. We're going to have a panel of experts on about talking about the changes in the federal budget, about seniors housing, about how right now I think 1 in 4 young people, the 1 in 4 deaths of young people are caused by opioids, right? Why is that? And why are we not declaring that an epidemic? I've had people come on too that talk about the coolest, innovative ways of building housing. There's a gentleman from out west that has an organization that when they knock down buildings, they take the materials from that building and they reinvest in building something else. So it's cheaper and great building materials because old wood apparently is better than new wood. Plus, 1/3 of landfills are from construction debris. So if you could both save the environment and create housing at the same time and cut costs in doing so, why would you not? And 3D printed houses and all sorts of cool stuff that's happening and research that's being done. I love the podcast. I nerd out over this stuff because I learn every week. For me, it's like a tutorial each week on how we rise to the challenges in front of us.
Uh, Michael, as I said it at the very start, that nobody chooses to be homeless. I know there are a lot of organizations in Toronto who are working along with yours, Blue Door. Um, all levels of government need to work together and figure out, because this is only going to get worse if we don't tackle the problem as soon as possible. Um, but I'm wondering, as community members, what can people do? For example, people who are listening to our podcast right now, in my neighborhood, in any neighborhood in Toronto, what can people do? How can youth get involved? I'm sure there are lots of programs in different colleges and universities where the community and social services, like I'm just thinking right now, how can uh, people who are in those programs, maybe they can get involved with something, maybe they can get credits for the work that they do in the community. How can hospitals help? I notice when you go to Emerge or any hospital, you see so many homeless people taking shelter in the lobbies. You get on transit, there's so many people using subway cars at night during the day to sleep and be there. How can people help in this crisis?
It's a great question. I'm going to give you an example of how everyday ordinary people can actually do something. Recently in York region, the region of York was going to build a new men's shelter in Aurora. Unfortunately, in the planning stages, it didn't pass through council. And that's a shame because it was a beautiful site. Here's the highlight out of that. A lot of community members who went there to find out and were open to learning were really upset that this didn't go through and formed their own little community group called Aurora Cares. And what are they doing? They're actually lobbying government at the municipal level, the provincial level, federal level to say we want housing and deeply affordable housing and shelters and funds to be to be given out to these organizations because we care about this problem. And government's listening because it's a group of community members, it's their constituents, right, that are doing so. That's what you can do. You can lobby government. You can vote as a start, right, and do the research around that. You can make sure housing is the number one priority and not just when we talk affordable housing, understanding what deeply affordable housing is. But here's the number one thing we can all do, and it will cost you nothing. Just be kind and understand and don't judge. When you see someone experiencing homelessness, quite often people say, should I approach? What should I do? Should I give them money? What if they spend it? What if they forget about the what ifs? You either give or you don't. If you give, hey, leave it up to, don't judge or try and prescribe what they do with that money. That's totally up to them, right? You're giving from your heart. And if you don't, that's okay too. But make eye contact if, you can usually tell if there's some different mental health challenges there. And if not, make eye contact. See them as a person that you're not just walking by in the street, right? Person experiencing homelessness. See the person first and be kind and be aware and take action and push your government to do the right thing, put the right resources into this. We need dollars and we need political will, and we know the ways forward. It's actually a solvable problem, and we showed that a little bit during the pandemic where we housed thousands of people quickly when we had the dollars and the resources.
I think you said something very important. We can lobby governments, we can always look at the wider and the bigger challenge there, but what can we do as people? Empathy is so important. I actually wonder, is Toronto a cold city that we don't even say hello to each other while passing by and on the road? Um, are we are we lacking empathy as Torontonians?
Well, I think there's the research has been done around it, and Toronto is not the friendliest of cities, and that's a shame. But there's plenty of wonderful people. I mean, across Toronto, I think we get locked into our little worlds and we walk out, and you're like, you know what? Now that you mention this, I did see a person experiencing homelessness, and I can be kind, and I can be, when my kids were really young, there was a guy outside of Shoppers Drug Mart, and I chatted with him. His name was Andy, and they began to see Andy as a human. Oh, Andy's not there today, and it was good. Now, I also had to say, anyone experiencing homelessness too, you've got to use good judgment in how you approach, and they might not want you to, or they might not be in the space right now to do that. But if if you know, like Andy, be kind. You teach people at an early age and to recognize that too, and it's not okay. I think it's tougher and tougher for people on the streets, right? Even asking for change, because most people now we're a cashless society, so we don't have that. And share a kind word and recognize that. I often say, "I'm so sorry, I haven't carried any cash." And sometimes they'll say to me, "Well, how about a Tim's card or whatever?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely, right." I think we have to check ourselves too. I remember once, even like, I'm in the field, but I have to check myself. I remember this gentleman outside a gas station. He said, "Buy me a sandwich." I thought, wow, he was direct. So I did. He said, "Buy me two." And in my head, I'm like, I can't believe he's not thanking me for one cent. I'm thinking, and I had to check myself to think, this guy's trying to survive. He's
Yeah.
not worried about my feelings. He's worried about where his next meal's coming from, right? So don't take that to heart, and know that if you give with a pure heart and don't make judgment.
So don't make judgment, have a perspective, and be kind. I think those are good messages at the end of our conversation. Thank you so much, Michael. Keep doing the wonderful work that you're doing. We're very thankful to you as Torontonians. And we hope that after listening to our podcast, if somebody happens to see a homeless person while traveling tomorrow in transit or on the road, they will at least smile and say hello. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.